Hi, everyone. Welcome to your post-debate debrief. I'm Jenna. This is Smarter News, and I'm glad to see you today. I'm laughing to myself a little bit because I wasn't going to use the word debrief. I was going to use the word postmortem, which is a little bit dark. And one of the big headlines coming from the vice presidential debate last night is that it wasn't dark. It felt different than past political events that we've witnessed. And that's one of the big takeaways. So my goal today is just a quick little summary of some of the key parts of last night's debates and a few things for you to consider as we look ahead to Election Day, which is 34 days away. That question about whether or not the vice president matters to the presidential ticket is one that is constantly debated every presidential cycle. And here's what I think is important to reflect on. Last night was the first and only time that we're going to see these vice presidential candidates debate. And so, for that reason, last night's event really mattered. But we, more than perhaps other generations of Americans in modern history, really understand why the vice presidency is important. And that's because of the news over the last several months. We have seen the two attempted assassinations of a former president. We've also seen the top of the Democrat ticket change because, in part, of questions about President Biden's overall well being, his ability to serve. And so we understand when someone says, the vice presidency is one heartbeat away from the president, we get that now. And one of the important parts of last night was looking at these two individuals on stage, vastly different people in some ways and have some other similarities in others, looking at them as not only candidates for the vice presidency, but potentially as a leader of the country. And while I'm hearing some political analysts ask that question, does anyone really care about the vice president? Is this going to change anything? We know that the race is so tight in so many of these key swing states. Is this going to change anything? Could this impact anything? As a journalist, what I will tell you is that at this point in the election cycle, everything matters. Everything matters. The stakes for last night were high, not only for these two specific politicians and what they mean for their ticket, but also for the American public. And if we're going to look at winners and losers, because that's what everybody does after a debate, and that's what we don't do at Smarter News, here's what I'd like you to consider. One of the winners last night was the American political process, because we saw a debate. It wasn't perfect. The candidates weren't perfect with every answer. The moderators weren't perfect. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But we saw an actual debate. We had two people with very different perspectives present their different perspectives, actually agree at certain times and disagree at others. And then one of the most important parts of the debate was the last 30 seconds when no one talked. The moderators had already said goodbye, and we were watching the stage from afar. And we watched two individuals who spent 90 minutes arguing at times with each other and who are really facing off in this massive, highly pressurized environment. Turn to each other, shake hands, introduce their wives, chat for a little bit. They didn't look like they hated each other. And then walk and shake hands with the moderator. And for that reason, that's why I present to you. I wonder if this was really a win for the American political process, because we walked away hearing from both sides, getting a little bit of arguing when it mattered, but getting an understanding that they have a difference of opinion and they can still shake hands and walk away. And that's one of the great things about America. And that's something that happens in our everyday life. Sometimes we don't see that reflected back to us on social media or on broadcast. And so this was a unique moment. We understand why last night matters. It's one and only. We understand why the vice presidency matters, especially now more than ever. And last night mattered too because of what it represented. It was a moment that just didn't have the angst and aggravation that seems so typical of American politics. There were some tense moments, but it wasn't all that. And so for that reason, this stood out as a very different event in this election cycle and quite frankly in others. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the moderation. The moderators were from CBS News, and there were a lot of big topics tackled. One of the big news items yesterday was we had this massive attack by Iran and Israel, and the United States also got involved. And there were questions swirling about whether or not there was a broader regional conflict. That was the first question of the night that was tackled by both candidates. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here to say that Governor Walz, in his first response, he had the first response of the two, came across a little bit nervous, a little bit more shaky when it came to issues about foreign policy. It's worth noting that JD Vance has experience in the military, as does Governor Walz. They have in different ways, different backgrounds, but one of JD Vance's roles in the military was communications. And so he came across very smooth. And this is sort of the tone setting question for the night that made me wonder, are we really going to tackle some news items of the day? Because this is what was in front of the American people, the threat of war, a massive storm that is just devastating and heartbreaking to watch in the aftermath. And also this port strike that could impact the entire US economy right as we're going into the holiday season. And so, what an opportunity for the moderators really to dig into the news of the day and pull that in and give these candidates some real life scenarios and real leadership questions around this. How would you lead? How would you bring the two sides together when it comes to this port strike? What do you think the role of the vice president could be in this? How would you approach this? How do you believe in union work? Organized labor. What do you think about this? And although this topic was mentioned, the moderators did not dig into it at all. When they talked about Hurricane Helene, it was quickly changed to a shift on climate change. So it was starting off talking about the devastation of the storm and then turning to climate change as the topic overall. This is a very difficult thing to do when you're in the seat of a moderator or in the seat of a journalist asking a question, because we're still at the point of this story where we don't know how many people died from this storm or what the property damage is like. And you really risk, as a moderator, coming across overtly political or trying to politicize the situation when you introduce a topic like climate change. It's not that climate change isn't a topic that shouldn't be discussed. It's just to put those two things next to each other felt a little off. A week or two later, maybe we could talk about it. But right now, where there's still a question about the federal response, the state response, and look, you have two individuals. One is a governor of a state, one is a senator who could talk about the role of the government in this, which they kind of took the question back to. That felt a little bit off. There were these moments too where the moderators tried to have an equal opportunity gotcha question, where they asked Governor Walz about whether or not his timeline was off, about when he said he was in Hong Kong watching the student protests against the Chinese government. Clearly, he was off. He said he was there during the time of these protests, but records show that he wasn't. And he's had a couple issues with some of these stories that he's told, and seemingly being a little bit loose with the details. I'm using that term, lightly, just because these are things that you have to go back and fact check. And quite frankly, this story about when he was in China or not, even for me who's reading the news every single day, I had to go back and look up. And I was curious about that gotcha question for him, because it did not give JD Vance an opportunity to go back and forth. And that's really what a debate is about. What is JD Vance going to say? Well, you're a liar. He really would need to know about that. And so it was really a singular question at Governor Walz that felt like, if it was an entree to a bigger conversation about China, maybe that would be great, but it wasn't. It was specifically about Governor Walz. And then the gotcha question for JD Vance was about election integrity and why he wasn't stronger in defense of election integrity of 2020. That's really what the crux was of that question. He talked about the fact that President Biden is in office now, and former President Trump and himself still have questions about the election, but respect the process. So he tried to answer this question in the aftermath of the debate. If you look at more left-leaning media, they're looking at this question as a question that he didn't answer confidently. It gave Governor Walz an opportunity to talk a little bit more, because that's a bigger national issue, whether than a fact check about a timeline of a trip. So that was sort of an interesting choice, to take some time away from the debate and sort of focus on that from the moderators. A couple of the other big topics that weren't discussed, in part, was Russia, this war in Ukraine, and whether or not these two individuals have a different thought about America's role in that. We're talking about really big countries with very big firepower: Russia, China, Iran, and this question about a pending conflict that's been sort of hanging over the American people. There was an opportunity missed to get into that a little bit more, where we saw more substantial debates, where there was a clear back and forth and a clear dividing line that was robust but not personal, was a debate about gun laws and school shootings, where Governor Walz had this moment where he said, his son was near a shooting. And JD Vance took time away from his response to say, "Hey, I'm really sorry to hear that. I didn't know that." And they had this moment that sort of brought the temperature down on this topic. And they both had some different thoughts about what to do to keep our kids safe. One of them for JD Vance was school security. For Governor Walz, it was a question about the guns. And at one part of this debate, he goes, sometimes it's just the guns. And even in this heightened political environment, this is a very tough topic for many when it comes up the Second Amendment and personal rights and our kids. You saw two different sides, but you saw their perspective on both of those sides, and not in an angry way. It was almost like the entire debate about that topic mapped out in a few minutes. And then we moved on. There was another topic that also had, it felt like a robust debate, and that was over abortion law. And you saw, again, clearly two sides. You have Senator Vance talking about the American political process and how the states should be able to have the right to make some of their own laws specific to this topic. And you have Governor Walz saying, no, this isn't a role for the states. This is a role for the federal government and our constitutional rights. That's something bigger than the states. Again, vastly different points of view, but you heard them. You could actually hear them. They weren't personally attacking each other. And although they were sort of taking digs at each other's running mate, they weren't taking digs at each other, and it didn't take away from a substantial debate on that topic. One of the things I'm going to be exploring, and something to look forward to, this is what I'm going to be doing today, is both of them agreed when it came to gun laws that there was something that Finland was doing correct. And I don't really know that much about Finland and what Finland is doing to keep their schools safe, or about Finnish gun laws. This might be an opportunity to learn. So for our mini scoop this week, I'm going to take a look at that. But that's really, when I look at the takeaways, that's what I really walk away with. We had these moments where these very hard topics were tackled. We had some topics that weren't tackled at all. We had some gotcha questions that felt a little bit misplaced in the effort to actually get a back and forth. And speaking of those gotcha questions, one of the things that, as I'm reflecting now on journalism and the media overall, one of the things I think we could do better is we need to be really forward looking. It's not that election integrity in 2020 doesn't matter, or I'm disregarding what happened on January 6th, or any of that. It is not, I do not want to be misinterpreted for that. Or when someone tells something about their past that's not really accurate, it comes to the question about integrity and honesty. These things do matter. But one of the things that the American people is looking at in leadership is vision, and looking towards the future, anticipating future problems and anticipating future solutions. And one of the things I can see in the American media is we're looking back a lot when we need to be looking forward, so that we continue to learn together and push these topics so we get some more answers of what the vision looks like for America, because that's really what this is about. So when I sit with this question about whether or not this debate mattered and who won and who lost, I'm not only left with, I think the winner was the American political process, because it worked last night. You saw two sides come together, debate, walk off stage after a handshake. That's something very unique to our country, and we sort of forget about it. I'd also say the winners in this include both party tickets, because neither candidate did something disastrous for either of their ticket. And in fact, both of them, you could argue, in their answers, supported their ticket in ways that not only could reassure their base of supporters, but one could wonder how that could resonate with an undecided voter. I think last night mattered. And I think a lot of things are going to matter in the next several weeks. Some we can anticipate, and some we're not, because the news changes every single day, and we're going to be with you for that. Real quick, there was a question that was raised on one network. I skip around, watched a lot of the analysis afterwards. I didn't do a lot of that last night, just because I wanted to make sure that I stayed kind of clear and focused for you. But there was a great question brought up. I believe it was by Dana Perino, who is a former White House press secretary. She's on Fox News. And she said, I'll be curious whether or not Vice President Harris and former President Trump will want to leave this as the last word, because they had an opportunity to do one more debate, and it didn't seem like that was going to happen after the first debate. And there was a question, even with the first debate, whether or not there was going to be a second debate. Will they want to just leave this alone, or will they like to get back on stage again? We'll see. I'll leave you with that question. Should they? Should they not? Do you need it? Do you not? What's the issue to you that you think is going to be the driving factor here in such a tight race? I look forward to your thoughts. You can email us hello@smarternews.com. We always love hearing from you. And I'll be back tomorrow and Friday with your mini scoop, where I'm going to do a little research on that. What has Finland got that we don't got? I want to know what Finland's got. Let's figure out. Maybe on a debate stage, with two different perspectives, we actually found a potential solution. And does that happen when we're able to debate? Isn't that the point? You get sometimes to a core of an issue and you find commonalities that are unexpected. Let's see if this is one. I'm on the case. I got to get to do some reporting. I'll do that for you. And I'll be back with more on smarternews.com throughout the weekend on social media at smarternews.com. Thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan news. We love you here. And we're so glad to be sharing this story with you. I'll see you with more.